The thing about survival is that it doesn't look like anything from the outside. It looks like a girl walking into a cafeteria on a Monday morning with her bag on one shoulder and her headphones around her neck and her face doing absolutely nothing. It looks like choosing the same table you always sat at even though the seat across from you is empty now. It looks like opening a workbook and uncapping a pen and writing the date at the top of the page like the date is information that matters. Stephanie Canine had perfected survival so long ago she couldn't remember learning it. She sat down, opened her Korean vocabulary notes. The table felt wider than it was. 3 weeks ago, this cafeteria had a version of normal in it. Naomi stealing food off her tray without asking, talking about 4 things at once, mismatched socks, that laugh that startled people. Now the seat across from her was just a seat. A chair. It is never just a chair. That's what Naomi had said the first week about Chaiwon's library throne. Stephanie uncapped her pen. Wrote nothing. She became aware, the way you become aware of a change in temperature, that someone had sat across from her. She looked up. Seo-jun had his book open. He wasn't looking at her. He was reading, or doing something that looked enough like reading, and she wasn't going to interrogate it. He'd set his coffee on the table. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. He turned a page. She looked back at her workbook. They ate lunch together for the first time. Neither of them called it that. Nobody in the cafeteria was brave enough to say anything about it either, which meant the entire room spent 40 minutes performing conversations while watching 2 people read in silence. And somehow that was the most interesting thing that had happened at Seoul International Academy in weeks. Chaiwon walked in at 12:15. The cafeteria did its usual thing, that involuntary full-body social adjustment, like a room of sunflowers tracking light, except the adjustment was smaller now. Quieter. 3 weeks ago it had been immediate and total, the parting of a sea. Now there was a half-second delay. A hesitation that hadn't existed before, thin as paper but unmistakably there. Chaiwon noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. She walked to her usual table. Not the one that had been cleared for her, because she no longer had people clearing things, but the one she'd sat at for 4 years and could therefore claim by sheer historical precedent. 2 girls followed her. From 6 down to 2. She sat like she'd chosen to sit alone, and the 2 girls were merely convenient furniture. She did not look at Stephanie's table, which meant she was looking at Stephanie's table the entire time. Seo-jun closed his book at 12:40, stood, picked up his coffee. He paused at the edge of the table like he was going to say something. Then didn't. Walked out. Min-soo materialized from somewhere near the exit the way Min-soo always materialized. From wherever he'd been standing for the last 40 minutes without anyone noticing him standing there. Stephanie watched him leave. Looked back at her workbook. She had written 3 vocabulary words and drawn a small, structurally accurate rendering of the SIA cafeteria layout in the margin. The Chaiwon table had a tiny crown over it. The crown had a crack in it. She hadn't noticed herself drawing it. The fellowship paperwork cleared that afternoon. Dr. Tiwa texted at 3 p.m. A string of messages, rapid fire, the typing style of a woman who had just refreshed a portal 6 times and was still processing what she was looking at. Everything's approved. All of it. The committee review is gone. Steph, it just cleared. Everything. Then, do you know anything about this? Stephanie read the messages on the bus home. Typed, no idea. That's amazing though. Sent it. Stared out the window. She knew exactly what it was. She knew whose hands had moved it and through which channels and in the approximate number of calls it would have taken. Short, quiet, in the voice he used when something was being decided rather than discussed. He hadn't told her he was going to do it. Hadn't mentioned it after. Sat across from her at lunch and read his book and turned his pages and let her find out through her mother's text messages, because that was how he operated, quietly, without requiring acknowledgement, like care was just a thing you did and not a thing you performed. She put her phone in her bag. Looked out the window at Seoul moving past. The city had started to feel less foreign 3 weeks ago. She wasn't sure when exactly it had happened. Somewhere between the library and the rooftop and a car ride in the rain, the city had stopped being the place she'd been sent and started being the place she lived. The cherry blossoms were finished now. The trees were just green. Normal. Hers. Now, before we go any further, my lovelies, if you have been here since season 1 you already know this story does not play fair with your emotions and season 2 is not about to start now. If Seo-jun sitting across from her at that table without a single word did something to your chest, drop a comment right now because you are not alone and I need to know how many of us are suffering together. Asterisk. And if you are new here, first of all, welcome. Second of all, go watch season 1 immediately because you are missing critical context, and also because you deserve to have your whole life rearranged by a Korean Mafia Heir who learns to pronounce a Yoruba name. And then come back. The subscribe button is right there. Press it. You will not regret this. Now, back to Seoul. That night, Dr. Tiwa called at 8:30. Normal call. Good day. How was school? Did you eat actual food or just the granola bars you think I don't know you keep in your bag? Stephanie told her about the vocabulary test. Dr. Tiwa told her about a surgery that had gone well and a resident who had finally stopped second-guessing himself mid-procedure. Normal. Warm. The specific warmth of two people who had crossed an ocean together and built something new and were both, in their different ways, surprised to find it working. Then, just before hanging up, Dr. Tiwa's voice shifted. Not dramatically, barely at all. Just a degree of tightening, the professional register sliding in like a second layer under the first. Steph, has anyone from the hospital administration spoken to you recently? Asked you questions about me, my schedule, my research, anything like that? Stephanie's hand tightened on the phone. No. Why? Nothing. Never mind, it's probably administrative. Have a good night, baby. She hung up. Stephanie sat on her bed and looked at her phone for a long time. The fellowship paperwork that had cleared that afternoon. Her mother's voice doing that thing it did when she was deciding how much to say. The fellowship review that had been dropped without explanation. The things that happened quietly in this world moved in both directions. She was only now beginning to understand the full shape of that. She opened her messages. Scrolled to Naomi's contact. The last message between them was from 6 weeks ago, a meme about Korean grammar that Stephanie had sent on a good day. She looked at Naomi's profile picture for a moment. Typed, I need to tell you something. Stared at it. Deleted it. Put her phone face down on the desk and went to brush her teeth. At 2 a.m. her phone lit up. Unknown number. One attachment. She opened it. A photograph. Taken from a distance, slightly elevated. The angle of someone standing across the street and slightly above. The subject of the photo was Stephanie, outside the SIA gates, that afternoon in her uniform. Bag on one shoulder. Headphones around her neck. Completely unaware. No message. No text. Nothing else. Just, I can see you. She sat with it in the dark for a long time. Soul quiet outside her window. That particular 2 a.m. quiet of a city that doesn't fully sleep but breathes slower after midnight. She thought about Chicago. About a courtroom. About a boy who had looked at her across a room and understood, in the way that certain people understand these things, that she was the reason his life was about to change. She had testified anyway. She would testify again. But sitting in the dark with that photo open on her phone, she was scared. Not the functional, manageable kind she'd learned to operate inside. The old kind. The kind that lived in her body before her mind could argue with it. She put the phone face down. Did not sleep. My lovelies, that photo. That photo. I need you to tell me in the comments. Did you clock who sent it? Because the clues have been sitting in this story since season 1, and if you've been paying attention, you might already know. Drop your theory below. And if you're watching this at 2 in the morning the same way Stephanie is sitting with that phone right now, first of all, same. Second of all, subscribe so you never miss a scene, because what is coming in the next scene is going to completely reset the board. See you there. She told no one about the photo for 4 days. This was not bravery. It was because she has decided quietly, privately, without announcing it to anyone, that she would like to be the one doing the handling for once. It wasn't working. She knew it wasn't working. She was going to school and sitting in class and eating lunch and studying in the library and being scared the entire time. And the fear was starting to take up the kind of space that made everything else slightly smaller. She was annotating a grammar exercise on Thursday evening when Seo Jun sat down across from her, looked at her face, and closed his book. She hadn't said anything. She hadn't changed her expression. But he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for months, like she was a frequency he'd learned to read. And something in what he saw made him put the book down. Kenine. She put her pen down and looked at him. Then took out her phone and slid it across the table with the photo open. He looked at it for a long time. His face did nothing visible. That was a thing she'd learned about him. His face did nothing visible exactly when it was doing the most. He picked up his own phone. Made a call, short and quiet, the Korean clean and direct. I need a trace on a number. Tonight. Hung up. Slid her phone back. You should have told me immediately. I know. Why didn't you? She looked at her workbook. The grammar exercise. The color-coded underlining she'd done for 40 minutes while being scared. Because every time I let you handle something for me, it gets harder to remember that I'm not yours to handle. The library was very quiet. What if I want you to be? He said it simply. Not as a declaration. Not with the weight of something rehearsed. Just a question. The honest kind, the kind that costs something to ask and more to leave hanging in the air. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. Outside the library window Seoul was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on in layers, the city shifting from its daytime self into something slower and warmer and less certain. She thought about the car in the rain. His hand moving a stack of books so the lamp wouldn't shine in her eyes while she slept. 40 minutes, he'd said. It was 40 minutes. He hadn't told her that. She didn't answer. But she didn't look away either. And she stayed in the library for 2 more hours, and he stayed with her, and when she finally left she said good night, and he said good night, and the word sat differently than it usually did, heavier, like it was doing more work than its 2 syllables should be able to carry. Minsu drove home in a silence that was distinctly different from all the other silences. The next morning a letter arrived at school addressed to Stephanie. No return address. Inside, one photograph, the two of them, she and Naomi, from a random Tuesday afternoon she barely remembered. Naomi mid-laugh, head thrown back, the kind of laugh that surprised her every time. Stephanie mid-eye roll at whatever had caused the laugh, both of them completely unaware the photo existed. On the back, in Naomi's handwriting, small, precise, the handwriting of someone who had been taught to write carefully. You have a tale from Chicago. Deal with it before someone else does it for you. A phone number below it. She brought it to Seo-jun. He looked at the number and made another call, and Minsu ran the trace and then came back and said, in the voice he used when something was larger than expected. The number registered in 3 different countries simultaneously and then disappeared. Like it was never there. Like someone had built a door just to walk through it once and lock it behind them. She's warning you, Seo-jun said. I know. She could have handled it herself. I know. Stephanie looked at the photograph. Naomi mid-laugh. That specific laugh. She wanted me to know I could. He was quiet for a moment. She knew you. She didn't correct the past tense. Neither did he. They both understood why she'd used it, and neither of them had a better answer to put in its place. Chaiwon had not retaliated. It had been 3 weeks, and she had not done a single visible thing, and this was slowly dawning on everyone as worse than anything she had ever done visibly. She came to school, did her work, was civil, not warm, not performative, simply civil, which for Chaiwon was so alien it read almost as a personality transplant. Her entourage was down to 2 girls who had stayed not out of loyalty, but out of the specific social paralysis of people who had built their entire identity around proximity to power and didn't know how to exist without it. She had stopped performing. That was the thing. The performance, the loud, polished, exhausting performance of Chai Won-yu, Queen of Seoul International Academy, had simply stopped. What was underneath it was quieter and, if anything, more precise. What she was actually doing, she had gone to her father. Not to ask him to fix it, she was done asking her father to fix things. A decision that had arrived somewhere in the 20 minutes she'd spent sitting on her bedroom floor in the glass from a broken mirror. She had gone to learn. Specifically, she wanted to understand the architecture of what Naomi had done and how she had done it. The intelligence, the patience of it, the months of sitting inside a situation and gathering and waiting and moving pieces without anyone seeing your hands. She was studying the move that had destroyed her. Chairman Yu, watching his daughter across the dinner table in this new mode, felt something he had not felt about Chaiwon before. Something adjacent to caution. He answered her questions. The library, last period on a Friday. Last 2 people in the building. The librarian had gone to the office and was clearly not coming back, her code already on when she left. Chaiwon was at a table 2 rows from Stephanie's. They had been sitting in the same room for 40 minutes without acknowledging it, which required a specific kind of mutual effort that neither of them was going to name. Then, without looking up from her book, you knew about Park Hyun-woo before the showcase. Stephanie kept writing. You suspected and went through with it anyway. I wasn't sure. But you suspected. Yes. Chaiwon was quiet for a moment. That was either very stupid or very brave. Maybe I didn't want to be the kind of person who punishes someone for something they haven't done yet. Chaiwon looked up. Actually looked, the full, direct, appraising look she usually deployed as a weapon. This time it was something else. Something closer to genuine curiosity, which was possibly the most dangerous thing Chaiwon, you had ever aimed in Stephanie's direction. She looked back at her book. He should have chosen better than me to be loyal to. He chose you because he wanted something. Everyone wants something. Not everyone builds a friendship around it. Chaiwon said nothing for a moment. Then, no. Not everyone does that. She went back to reading. Stephanie went back to writing. The library settled into the particular quiet of 2 people who had said more than they planned to and were both, privately, considering what it meant. It changed nothing between them or. It changed something. That night Stephanie was at her desk, workbook open, Seoul doing its late evening glitter outside the window, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message. You have a tale from Chicago. Deal with it before someone else does it for you. She had already gotten that warning. This was a different message. Different number. She read it twice. The people protecting you have secrets too. That was all. She put the phone down. Picked it up again. Put it down. Looked at the window. Thought about Chairman Kang's handshake and the way Seo-jun had said yes when she asked if his father was deciding something about her. Said it without hesitation, which meant he already knew, which meant there was a version of this conversation he was not having with her yet. She thought about Minsu's trace on Naomi's number. 3 countries simultaneously. She thought about Naomi, who had known everything about this school before she'd set foot in it. Who had maps. She thought about the photo at 2 a.m. and the letter the next morning and the way certain things in her life kept arriving in sequence. Each one a half step ahead of her understanding, like someone was pacing the reveals. She picked up her pen, tapped it 3 times on the desk, opened her workbook to a clean page. At the top wrote, "What do I actually know?" Underneath it, she began to list. Not in color-coded vocabulary columns. Just a list in plain handwriting of everything that had happened since she arrived in Seoul and every question she still didn't have the answer to. By the time she finished, she had filled 2 pages. She looked at it for a long time. Then she added 1 more line at the bottom and underlined it twice. "Who arranged for us to be here?" She had 2 pages of questions and 0 answers and a school day starting in 6 hours. Stephanie closed the workbook, put it in her bag, and went to bed. Not because she was done thinking about it. She would not be done thinking about it for a long time. But because Dr. Tiwa had raised her to understand that exhaustion was not a productivity tool, and a tired mind made sloppy decisions, and sloppy decisions in complicated situations were how people got hurt. She lay in the dark and thought about it anyway. My lovelies, Stephanie Kenine just asked the question that this entire story has been building toward, and I need you to sit with that for a second. Who brought them to Seoul? Because it was not random. Nothing in this story has been random. The fellowship, the school, the timing of everything. Drop your theories in the comments right now. I am reading every single one, and some of you are going to be embarrassingly close to the truth. Dr. Tiwa had been a surgeon for 19 years. She had learned to read information fast, under pressure, with incomplete data and competing variables and people around her expecting confident decisions. She had learned that the most dangerous thing in a high-stakes environment was not ignorance. Ignorance you could work around. The most dangerous thing was a gap that someone had deliberately created to look like nothing was there. She had been looking at a gap for 3 weeks. The fellowship review that had disappeared. The committee that had convened and then unconvened without documentation. The administrative pressure that had arrived with no clear origin and lifted with no clear reason, overnight, like someone had turned a dial. In medicine, when a patient's numbers move that fast with no clinical explanation, you didn't file it under good news and move on. You found out why. She started pulling threads on a Sunday evening while a pot of fried rice did its low-heat thing on the stove, and Stephanie was in her room with her workbook and her headphones and the focused quiet that meant she was working through something hard. By Tuesday, she had a name. It wasn't a name she knew, but it was connected to a name she did know, connected to a school, connected to a family, connected to a fellowship review that had no business being connected to any of those things. She sat with it for 2 days, turned it over, checked it from different angles the way she checked a diagnosis she didn't want to be right about. It was right. She called Stephanie into the kitchen on Thursday evening, made tea, sat down at the table with her hands around the mug and the expression she used in consultations when she was about to say something the patient needed to hear clearly and without softening. How serious is the situation at school? The truth, Steph. Not the version where you're fine. Stephanie sat down across from her, looked at her mother, this woman who had packed 2 lives into suitcases and crossed 12 time zones to keep her safe, who was sitting here after a 14-hour shift with a question she already half knew the answer to and was asking anyway because she needed to hear it from Stephanie's mouth. She told her the truth. All of it. The photograph. The locker. The Kong and Yu families and the merger and the pressure on the fellowship and Hyunwoo and the showcase and the letter from Naomi and what Min-soo had found and hadn't found tracing the number. Everything she'd been carrying in her color-coded internal filing system since September. It took 22 minutes. Dr. Tiwa listened without interrupting once. When Stephanie finished, the fried rice had gone from low heat to needing attention, but neither of them moved. The kitchen was quiet. Then, tell me about this boy. Mom, the one who moved the paperwork. Tell me about him. Stephanie told her about Seo Jun. Dr. Tiwa asked 2 questions, both of them specific, the kind that sounded simple and weren't. Does he tell you things before he does them or after? And then, when something goes wrong, where does he go first, the problem or you? Stephanie thought about the library. The closed book. Me. Dr. Tiwa nodded slowly. Set her mug down. I want to meet him. Mom. I'm not asking, Kenine. Seo Jun arrived on Saturday at 2 p.m. Punctual to the minute, which Stephanie noted with the private acknowledgement that he was nervous in exactly the way that someone who was never nervous would be nervous. Not visibly, but in the overcorrection. He had told Min-soo he didn't need driving. Min-soo had driven him anyway and was currently parked outside pretending to read something on his phone. The suit was 1 register too formal for a Saturday afternoon visit, and he had clearly clocked this himself because he'd left the jacket in the car and arrived in just the shirt, sleeves rolled, which was the sartorial equivalent of someone who'd changed their mind halfway up the front walk. Dr. Tiwa opened the door. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. The full-body, high-speed assessment of a woman who read people for a living in environments where being wrong had consequences. Then she stepped back. Come in. She did not ask about his father's business. Did not ask about the family name, or what it carried, or what he was going to inherit, or any of the questions that Seo Jun had been answering in one form or another since he was old enough to sit through a business dinner. She made tea. The good kind, the kind she reserved, Stephanie knew, for conversations she was taking seriously, and sat across from him and asked what he was reading. He told her. She asked what he thought of it. He told her that too, and the answer was longer than he'd planned and more specific than was strictly necessary for a polite social exchange, and Dr. Tiwa's expression moved in a way that suggested she'd noticed this. She asked what he wanted that had nothing to do with what he was supposed to want. Seo Jun was quiet for a moment, not stalling, actually thinking about it, which was its own kind of answer. Then he told her something that Stephanie, sitting in her room with the door slightly open, had never heard him say to anyone. She sat very still and listened. Dr. Tiwa asked about Stephanie last. 2 questions, both precise. What do you do when she won't let you help her? And, has she ever asked you for something? Once, he said. She asked me to stay in the library. A pause. She didn't say it like that, but that's what it was. Dr. Tiwa looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her tea. You can come back. Thank you, Dr. Tiwa. She walked him to the door. He said goodbye. She said, conversationally, as he was stepping out. She's going to fight you on everything. It's not a warning. It's just accurate information. I know. Good. She closed the door. Stephanie emerged from her room 30 seconds later. Dr. Tiwa was already back in the kitchen, putting the mugs in the sink, expression doing nothing specific. Well, he's going to be a problem. Mom, for my blood pressure. She handed Stephanie a mug to dry. He looks at you like you're something he found that he didn't know he was looking for. Men like that are extremely inconvenient. She paused. Also, he's read 4 of the same books your father read. I don't know what to do with that information. Stephanie dried the mug. Said nothing. Stared at the mug like it required her full concentration. The corner of her mouth did something she couldn't stop in time. Dr. Tiwa saw it. Said nothing. Turned back to the sink. But her shoulders, for the first time in 3 weeks, had come down from where they'd been living. Somewhere around her ears tight, the posture of a woman waiting for the next thing to go wrong. They finished the dishes. Stephanie went back to her room. Sat at her desk. Opened her workbook to the question she'd written and underlined twice. Who arranged for us to be here? She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened a new message to Seo Jun. Typed. I want to know what you said when she asked what you wanted. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then I know. Are you going to tell me? A pause. Longer than his usual response time. When you're ready to ask in person. She stared at the message. Put her phone face down. Picked it back up. Put it face down again. Outside her window, Seoul did its evening thing. That slow, layered settling of a city that had been running all day and was finally, almost breathing out. Somewhere in it, Min-soo was driving a car back toward the Kong residence. Somewhere in it, her mother was reading on the couch with her feet up for the first time in weeks. Somewhere in it, a trail that Min-soo was still pulling was getting closer to something none of them had names for yet. She tapped her pen 3 times on the desk. Opened her workbook. Started writing. The summons came the following week. Not a request, a scheduling. Chairman Kong would be attending the SIA annual patrons dinner and had asked that Seo Jun bring, the American girl, to be introduced. Seo Jun told her this in the library on a Wednesday, matter of fact, like it was information she'd simply need to have. She stopped writing mid-word. Why? Because he wants to see what he's dealing with. What are you dealing with? He looked at her, fully, directly, the kind of eye contact he gave almost no one. Someone worth dealing with. She held that for a second. Looked back at her notebook. What does one wear to meet a Korean boss? He prefers chairman. I'm sure he does. She told her mother Thursday evening, matter of fact, the way she had learned to deliver complicated information to Dr. Tiwa, directly, without pre-softening, because Dr. Tiwa was a woman who found pre-softening more alarming than the thing itself. Dr. Tiwa listened. Set down her fork. Picked it back up. Wear the navy dress. The one with the clean neckline. Then, and Stephanie, don't perform. Just be exactly who you are. Powerful people can smell performance from across a room, and it makes them comfortable because it means you want something from them. If you don't perform, they can't place you. That's where you want to be. Stephanie had not told her mother this was going to be fine. Dr. Tiwa had not asked her to. They understood each other. The patrons' dinner was held in the school's formal hall, a room that existed, Stephanie had decided, specifically to make people feel the weight of the institution they were inside. Dark wood paneling. Gold SIA crests at measured intervals. Tables with actual linen. The kind of event where the flowers cost more than most people's rent, and everyone in the room knew it, and nobody said so. She arrived with Seo Jun. He'd come to the apartment at 7. No car announcement, just a knock, 2 minutes early. And when she opened the door, he looked at her for 1 second in the navy dress with the clean neckline, and then looked at the wall beside her head and said, completely neutrally, "We should go." You okay? We should go. She grabbed her bag. Chairman Kongdae was not what she'd built in her head. She had been constructing him since September, assembling a figure from fragments, from the shape of Seo Jun's silences when his father came up, from the way Min-soo's posture changed when he said the name, from the cold efficiency of what had happened to her mother's fellowship paperwork. She had built someone severe, the human equivalent of a locked room. The man who crossed the hall toward them moved like someone who had decided long ago that he had nowhere to be but here. Medium height, immaculate, a face that had aged into something more interesting than it had probably been at 30. He shook her hand with a grip that was exactly calibrated. Firm enough to mean something, brief enough to mean he didn't need to prove it. Stephanie, he said. Not Miss Canine. Not the American student. Just her name, like he'd been using it for years. I've been looking forward to this. He spoke about her mother's research for 4 minutes with the informed engagement of someone who had done actual reading. Not a briefing, reading, the kind where you follow citations and end up somewhere you didn't expect. He asked about her transition to Seoul with the curiosity of a man who was interested in how people adapted to environments that weren't built for them. He was warm. He was educated. He was, without a single overt gesture, the most complete demonstration of controlled power she had ever been standing inside. The frightening thing wasn't anything he did. It was what he didn't do. He didn't need to do anything. The room organized itself around him without his participation. People angled toward him the way plants angled toward windows. And he stood in the middle of all of it and gave her his full attention, which was somehow the most unsettling part because his full attention felt like being read by something that didn't miss. At the end of their conversation, pleasant, unhurried, he said, Seoul is a complicated city for someone without roots here. I hope you're finding it hospitable. I'm finding it interesting. He smiled. A real one, or real enough that the difference didn't matter. Yes, I imagine you would. She smiled back. They both knew exactly what had been exchanged. In the car afterward, Seo Jun waited until Min-soo had pulled out of the school gates before he asked, What did you think? I think he's deciding something. He's always deciding something. About me. Specifically. A pause. Outside, Seoul moved past the windows. The particular velocity of the city at night, lights layering, the Han River appearing and disappearing between buildings. Yes. She nodded and absorbed it. Okay. He watched her do this. The way she processed difficult information, the brief stillness of it. The way she came out the other side already in forward motion without making a production of the transition. She looked at him. He was looking out his own window. The city slid past. Min-soo drove. The call came the following Tuesday. Not to Seo Jun's phone. To the house line, the formal one, which his father used when a conversation was being recorded for its own significance rather than its content. Seo Jun was already in the building when it came through, which he suspected was not coincidental. The formal office. Han River view, gray and broad in the late afternoon. The desk that hadn't moved in 20 years. Chairman Kong behind it, jacket on, the posture of a man who had arranged himself for something. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He laid it out the way he laid out all business. Clearly, without sentiment, with the full information visible, so you couldn't claim later that you hadn't understood. The Kong-Yu merger represented the most significant consolidation of allied assets in a decade. The Yu family's withdrawal from the agreement, contingent on the current situation being corrected, would cost the Kong organization a figure that Seo Jun was old enough to understand fully. The correction required was simple. Distance from the American girl. Allow the Yu arrangement, the one that had existed in some form, since both families decided it should exist, to proceed. Everything would settle. Everyone would move forward. Seo Jun sat across from his father and listened to all of it without interrupting. When it was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then, no. Chairman Kong looked at his son with the expression of a man encountering a variable he had not factored. That wasn't a request. I know what it was. The silence that followed existed only between people who loved each other and were capable of destroying each other, and both knew it. Chairman Kong stood, moved to the window. The Han River sat there, indifferent, doing what rivers did. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter and more dangerous for being quieter. You understand what you're choosing. Yes. You're choosing it anyway. Yes. His father was still for a long time. Long enough that the light in the room shifted slightly. The afternoon doing its slow, indifferent lean toward evening. Then to the window, to the river, to something that wasn't Seo Jun. Your mother was like that. He didn't elaborate. Didn't turn around. The statement sat in the room, and neither of them touched it. You can go. Seo Jun stood. Walked to the door. His hand was on the frame when his father spoke again, still to the window. The U deal will collapse. You understand what that means for the organization. Yes. And you're still saying no. Yes. A pause. Then nothing. Seo Jun left. In the elevator down 31 floors, he called Min-soo. His voice was level and completely calm in the way that meant the opposite of calm. Double her security. Both of them. Stephanie and Dr. Tiwa. I don't care what the resource cost is. Done, Minsu said and hung up. The Kongyu merger collapsed within the week. Regulatory complications, officially. A timing issue. The language that powerful people use when they want a clean surface over something that isn't. Chairman Yu withdrew without public comment. He would not join his empire to a family whose heir had publicly chosen a direction that humiliated his daughter. Not because of sentiment, but because in the world these men operated in, being publicly overruled by your own child was a structural weakness, and structural weaknesses had consequences. Chairman Kong lost a significant deal. He sat with this in the formal office for a long time after the last call ended. The river was dark by then. He poured 2 fingers of something and didn't drink it. He thought about a woman who had chosen things anyway 23 years ago. Chosen him, specifically, when every reasonable calculation said not to, and been right in all the ways that mattered and wrong only in the way neither of them could have predicted. He thought about his son in the elevator. He didn't call anyone. He sat with the river and the untouched glass, and the particular quiet of a man thinking about something he believed was already decided. Stephanie found out through Seo Jun, who told her in the library on Thursday with the same directness he brought to everything. The merger fell through. She looked up. Because of me. Because of me, he said. I made the choice. Seo Jun. Kenin. He said it quietly, the way he always said it when he needed her to actually hear him, rather than the version of him she was busy arguing with in her head. I made the choice. That means I own the consequences. Not you. She looked at him for a long moment. At the closed book on the table. At the second copy of the anthology he'd started keeping on his side, so she wouldn't have to reach. At 11 weeks of evenings assembled into the texture of something that had become, without her fully signing off on it, indispensable. Your father. Will adjust. You don't know that. No, he said. But he raised me. So some of this is his fault. She stared at him. He picked up his book. Opened it to his page. And because she was Stephanie Canine, who had been carrying a list of questions for 2 months, and had learned exactly when to push and when to let a thing breathe, she picked up her pen and went back to her notes. But she moved her workbook 3 inches to the left. Closer to the center of the table. Closer to his side. He didn't say anything about it. He noticed. She knew he noticed. They went back to their books. He stepped out of a coffee shop on a Wednesday morning, and she saw him before he saw her. Or maybe he let her see him first. She couldn't tell, and that was the part that stayed with her. That she genuinely could not tell whether she'd caught him off guard, or whether the off guard was the point. Zed had always been good at making you second-guess the geometry of a situation. It was the thing about him she'd never been able to adequately explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it. Like standing on ground that looked solid, but moved slightly underweight. He was 19, and he looked like someone who had spent the last year and a half deciding something. He wasn't bigger than she remembered or more frightening in any quantifiable way. He was just there, on a street in Seoul, in a city that had started to feel like hers, and the specific wrongness of it, the violation of the distance she had put between then and now, hit her somewhere below thought. She stopped walking. He looked at her across the street with an expression she recognized. The expression of someone who had been planning the moment of being seen. Then she pulled out her phone and called Seo Jun. First time she had ever called him. Not the other way around. She called him, and he picked up on the second ring, and she said, "The coffee shop on Mapodero, across from the pharmacy." "I need you," he said. "Don't move." She didn't move. She stood on the pavement with her bag on her shoulder, and her face doing nothing, and watched Zed watch her, and thought about a courtroom in Chicago, and a boy who had looked at her across a room and decided she was going to regret what she'd done. She had been 17, and she had testified anyway, because Dr. Tiwa had raised her to understand that doing the right thing was not conditional on whether it was convenient or safe. She had not regretted it. She was not going to start now. Minsu's car turned onto the street in 4 minutes. She knew the route from school. It shouldn't have been 4 minutes. It should have been 9. She didn't examine what that meant about where Minsu had been parked. Zed saw the car. He did the reading that people did when they understood a room had shifted. Fast, flat, accurate. And he looked back at Stephanie one more time. Then he walked away. Slowly. Hands in his pockets. Making absolutely sure she saw that he was choosing to leave. That this was him deciding. That the decision could go the other way just as easily. She got in the car. Seo Jun was already in the back. He looked at her face when she got in. The full, quick assessment, checking for something. And then looked out the window in the direction Zed had gone. His jaw was set in the specific way it's set when he was making calculations he wasn't sharing yet. "He's going to try again," she said. "I know. He's not here by accident. He planned this, to being somewhere I'd see him. He wanted me to know he could get close." "I know." He looked at her. "Kenin, I need you to let me handle this one. You can't just—" "I'm not asking as," he stopped. Started again. "I'm asking as someone who," stopped again. Minsu from the front, without turning around. He's asking as someone who would very much like you to still be in Seoul tomorrow. Seo-jun gave Min-soo a look that communicated several things. Min-soo looked at the road with the serenity of a man who had said what needed saying and was at peace with the consequences. Stephanie looked at her hands in her lap, at the bag on her knee, at the city moving past the window, her city now, hers, and a boy from Chicago had walked into it like a reminder that the past had a longer reach than geography. Okay, she said, but I want to know what you do. After. Okay. I mean it, Seo-jun. What actually happens? He looked at her. Okay. She nodded. Looked back out the window. Her hands had stopped being completely steady at some point during the last 15 minutes, and she made them stop shaking now through the effort of will that her mother had taught her and Chicago had refined. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. The city kept moving. Chaiwon found her in the corridor between third and fourth period. Not her usual approach. Chaiwon's usual approach was a studied, public, audience-equipped event. This was just a stairwell, no audience, no performance setup, and Chaiwon's hand on her elbow pulling her sideways with a grip that was not rough, but was completely non-negotiable. I need 30 seconds, Chaiwon said. You're taking them regardless. Yes. She glanced toward the stairwell entrance. Checking, Stephanie realized that they were alone. Chaiwon checking for witnesses before saying something was new. There's a boy. Not Korean. He reached out through a contact trying to get your schedule, your route home, your routine. Stephanie went still. The contact came to me because I'm still the person at this school who knows things regardless of a pause, the briefest acknowledgement of the last 3 weeks, current circumstances. I'm telling you because you need to know. Why? Chaiwon looked at her with the expression she'd had in the library. The genuine curiosity, the one without weaponry behind it. Because I want to destroy you myself. Flat. Factual. I'm not outsourcing it to some boy from Chicago who doesn't know what he's walking into. She straightened her blazer. Walked back toward the corridor. Paused at the stairwell entrance without turning around. Tell Kong Seo-jun before tonight. The contact is already nervous and nervous people make fast decisions. She left. Stephanie stood in the stairwell for a moment. Thought about what Naomi had said months ago in the library. She's going to have consequences. She almost laughed. Not happily, but genuinely, at the specific impossible shape of the situation, at the fact that the girl who had made her first 3 months in Seoul a calculated exercise in psychological warfare had just in 30 seconds in a stairwell possibly saved her from something worse. She called Seo-jun. Zed made his move on Friday evening. Stephanie was walking home from a study session. Slightly earlier than usual, slightly different route, a decision she'd made on instinct that morning without fully examining the instinct. He came out of a side street with 2 people and the unhurried energy of someone who had rehearsed the scene enough times to be comfortable in it. Just a conversation, he said. That's all this is. She stopped. Looked at him. Didn't step back. What Zed had not calculated, could not have calculated, was that Min-soo had been 3 cars behind her every evening for 2 weeks without her seeing him, with the practiced invisibility of someone who had been doing this for 11 years. Zed and the 2 people with him were intercepted before they reached her. Clean. Quiet. Efficient in the way of people who were very practiced at this. They were not harmed. Seo-jun had been specific about that. But they were in the air and out of South Korea within 12 hours in a way that made it unmistakably clear that this was not an invitation they could decline or defer. Stephanie found out that evening. She was in the apartment, Dr. Tiwa beside her, when Seo-jun arrived. He sat down at the kitchen table. Told her it was done. No details, not yet. She'd asked for them after, and he'd said after, and she'd accepted that because she was learning the specific grammar of what he told her immediately versus what he told her when he decided how to say it. Is he gone? Yes. For good. Yes. She nodded. Breathed. In through her nose. Out through her mouth. Something in her chest that had been braced since Wednesday morning. Since the coffee shop, since the pavement, came loose. Not all the way. But enough. Thank you, she said. Dr. Tiwa stood up. I'll make tea. Nobody had asked for tea. She went to make it anyway because she was a brilliant woman who understood when a room needed 1 fewer person in it. They were alone in the kitchen. He was still sitting at the table. She was standing at the counter with her back to it, which put 2 feet of kitchen between them, which was the smallest amount of space they'd been in together that wasn't a library or a car. The apartment was quiet. Seoul outside the window doing its evening thing. That slow, particular exhale, the city breathing differently after dark. He said her name. Kenin. She said, I know before he'd finished whatever the next word was going to be, because she did know, had known for a while, had been watching him know it and watching herself know it without naming either. The way you leave a word on the tip of your tongue because saying it out loud makes it irreversible. He stood up, crossed the 2 feet of the kitchen. She didn't move. He reached up and tucked 1 lock of her hair back from her face. Just that, Just the one gesture, his hand staying at her jaw after, fingers light against her jaw, the specific gentleness of someone being careful with something they don't want to damage. She closed her eyes. He stayed there, watching her face the way he watched things he was trying to understand completely before he made a decision about them. Dr. Tiwa's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Tea is ready," said in the tone of a woman who had given them exactly as long as she was going to give them. They stepped apart. He sat back down at the table. She pushed off the counter. Dr. Tiwa came in with 3 mugs and set them down and sat in her chair and picked up her own mug and looked at neither of them specifically and said, "Seo Jun, how is your father?" Seo Jun looked at Dr. Tiwa. Something in his expression changed, something almost not quite like being caught. "He's well. Thank you." "Good," said Dr. Tiwa and drank her tea. Outside, in the parked car, Min-soo put his phone down, looked at the building entrance, looked at the steering wheel, looked at the building entrance again. Then he smiled. Small. Private. The smile of a man who had been waiting a long time to see something and was glad he'd been patient enough to get there. The dinner invitation came through the house line. Not a text, not a message through Seo Jun. The house line, which Chairman Kong used for things he wanted on record in some unofficial, atmospheric sense. The kind of call that meant, "This is deliberate, and I would like everyone involved to understand that it is deliberate." Seo Jun told her on the rooftop. He'd found her there after school, chips, workbook, the familiar arrangement, and sat beside her and said it without preamble because they had long since stopped wasting each other's time with preamble. "My father wants you for dinner. At the house. Next Saturday." She stopped mid-chip. "Is that a threat?" "No." "You hesitated." "I was choosing the most accurate answer." He looked at her. "It's not a threat. He just wants to understand what he's already decided to accept. He's decided to accept me. He's decided I've decided. Which means he's working with fixed variables now instead of trying to change them. And the dinner is him figuring out what the fixed variable actually is." "Yes." She looked at her chips. Considered. "Tell me what to wear. Something that looks like you didn't think too hard about it." That's surprisingly specific advice. He'll respect it more than something chosen to impress him. He's been watching people dress to impress him for 30 years. She looked at him. "You've been thinking about this." He said nothing, which was its own answer, and she noted it. The image of him considering what his father would think of her before the dinner was even scheduled. Saturday arrived. She wore something her mother had packed from Lagos 4 years ago. Deep burgundy, clean lines, the kind of garment that had been worn by a woman who understood that elegance was a position and not a performance. Dr. Tiwa had pressed it herself that morning, wordlessly, which was its own kind of statement. The Kong residence was in Hanamdong, the kind of address that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. The building was set back from the road, older than the neighborhood around it, maintained with the deliberate care of something that had survived multiple versions of the city and intended to survive several more. Min-soo pulled up. Didn't get out. Seo Jun opened her door himself. She noticed. Said nothing. Chairman Kong met them in the entrance hall. No staff hovering, no formal arrangement, just him jacket off, which she understood immediately was deliberate. The removal of one layer of formality. A calibrated informality. "Stephanie." The handshake again, the same intent grip, the same brevity. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation." They ate in a room that looked used, books on the side table, a reading lamp with a different bulb from the others, the texture of a space that someone actually inhabited rather than maintained for guests. She clocked this. She suspected she was supposed to clock it. The food was served without show. The conversation moved through her mother's research, through Seoul in winter versus Seoul in spring, through a book he mentioned that she had actually read. Not in preparation, just read, a year ago in Chicago, and when she said this something in his expression adjusted by a degree she almost missed. Almost. He was testing things. Not aggressively. With the patience of someone who had all evening and no need to rush. She answered everything honestly and without elaboration, which she had learned from her mother was the most disarming thing you could do in a room with a powerful person. Give them exactly what they asked for and nothing extra. It denied them the chance to read between lines that didn't exist. Seo Jun was mostly quiet. He ate. He listened. He watched his father, and then watched her, and then watched his father again with the expression of someone following a match where both players were better than anyone expected. At the end of the meal, Chairman Kong set down his tea and looked at her directly for the first time all evening. The full, flat, undecorated look she'd gotten at the patron's dinner, the one that felt like being read rather than observed. "My son has never been inconvenienced by anything," he said. "Until you." She held the look. "I'm not trying to inconvenience anyone." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it interesting." He stood. The dinner was over. He walked them to the door himself, no staff, again deliberate, and shook her hand again at the threshold. Then, as Seo Jun was moving toward the car, "Stephanie." She turned. "My son waits for things he decides are worth waiting for." He said it pleasantly, informationally, the way he said everything. He's never decided that before. He closed the door. She was quiet in the car for a long time. Sol moved past the windows. Minsu drove. Seo-jun sat beside her in the specific stillness he had when he was letting her process without interrupting the process. He said, "You've never waited for anything before." Minsu tells him things. "Is it true?" A pause. The city moved. "Yes." She looked at her hands in her lap. At the burgundy fabric. At the street lights going past in a rhythm that was almost regular, but not quite. "He's accepted it," she said. Not warmly. But he's accepted it. "Yes." "Why?" Seo-jun was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I told him no and I didn't break. He respects that more than agreement. He always has." He paused. "He also read 2 of your mother's published papers before the patron's dinner." She turned to look at him. "He what?" "Peer-reviewed. The 2019 one and the one from last year." "Why would he?" "Because you matter to me." He said it to the window. Straightforwardly, the way he said things when he decided they were true and had no remaining interest in not saying them. "So she matters." So he read her work. The car was very quiet. Seo-jun. That's, she stopped. Started again. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it." She looked back out her own window. Seoul doing its late night thing. Quieter now, warmer, the city at an hour when it stopped performing and just existed. She thought about what it meant that a man who had spent 30 years building an empire had spent time reading her mother's surgical research because his son had decided something. The specific weight of that. The specific tenderness of it, coming from the direction it came from. "Thank you," she said, "for saying no to him. I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know. That's why I'm thanking you." He looked at her then. In the dark of the car, Seoul sliding past behind him, he looked at her with the expression she'd been noting for months and had never quite been able to name. And she looked back, and neither of them looked away this time. Minsu, in the front, found something extremely interesting to look at on the road directly ahead. She was at her desk at 11 p.m., workbook open, when she heard the key in the lock. Her body knew before her brain did. She was already still, already listening, by the time she'd consciously registered the sound. Then Dr. Tiwa's voice from the entrance. "It's me, baby. Late surgery." She came into Stephanie's room still in her scrubs, sat on the edge of the bed, and asked about the dinner with her shoes still on, which she never did, which meant she'd come straight here before doing anything else. Stephanie told her. All of it. The room, the food, the conversation, the thing Chairman Kong had said at the door. Dr. Tiwa listened with her hands in her lap, and her expression doing its calibrating thing. The thing Stephanie had grown up reading like weather. When it was done, he read my papers. Yes. Dr. Tiwa was quiet for a moment. Then she took her shoes off and set them neatly by the door and said, "That man is more complicated than I was giving him credit for," in the voice she used when she was revising an assessment. Then, "Go to sleep, Canine. You have a vocabulary test Monday." She turned off the light on her way out. Stephanie sat in the dark. Thought about the dinner. About the window and the river, and your mother was like that. About a man revising his variables because his son had chosen something and held the choice. She opened her workbook. Added one line to the bottom of her question list, below the one she'd underlined twice. What did his mother choose? Naomi was in her chair on a Thursday. Not a different chair. Her chair. The specific seat she had claimed by arriving first every time. The one that put her back to the wall and her eyes to the door, which Stephanie had understood at the time as Naomi being Naomi and understood now as something with a more deliberate action. The coffee was on Stephanie's side of the table. The right order. The right temperature, which meant she'd timed the arrival. Some things apparently didn't change. Stephanie stopped in the library doorway. Looked at her. Naomi looked back. The warmth was there, immediate, present, the specific warmth that Stephanie had spent 6 weeks trying to retrospectively classify as performed and had failed every time because it wasn't. That was the thing about Naomi that no clean narrative about her could fully accommodate. The warmth was real. It had always been real. It had also always been operating alongside something else, and the something else had its own agenda, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and there was no version of the story where only one of them was. Stephanie crossed the room. Sat down. Picked up the coffee. "You warned me about Chicago." "Yes." "You didn't have to." "No." "But you did." "Yes." She held the coffee. Looked at Naomi, at the mismatched socks, today yellow on the left and something with small ducks on the right, at the warm, steady, complicated face of the most dangerous person she had ever considered a friend. "You're going to have to tell me everything." "I know. Everything, Naomi. Not the version that makes me comfortable. Everything. It's going to take a while. I have time." It took 2 hours. Naomi told it the way she did everything. Clearly, without flinching from the hard parts, with the specific honesty of someone who had decided that this particular person had earned the real version. The network. Her grandfather. A name Stephanie had never heard and wouldn't find if she searched, which was the point of it. The expansion that Chaiwon's father had blocked. The 8 figures and 2 years of groundwork it had cost. SIA as the chosen location. Chosen because it was where Chairman Yu's daughter went, where the target was accessible, where the conditions could be built carefully and over time. And me, Stephanie said. Not a question. You were supposed to be cover, Naomi said. The clean friendship. Someone genuine enough to make me invisible by proximity. Supposed to be. Yes. And then, Naomi looked at her hands on the table. At the coffee she hadn't touched. At the particular middle distance of someone saying something they've rehearsed, and discovering in the saying of it that it's still harder than the rehearsal. And then you were the first person in 4 years who sat next to me without wanting anything. You didn't want my connections or my information or my family name or access to anything I could give you. She stopped. You just sat there and ate your rice and told me the chair wasn't just a chair. It wasn't just a chair. I know that now. Stephanie was quiet for a moment. Was any of it real? All of it, Naomi said. Then, more carefully. All of what I felt was real. What I did around it, she stopped again. I didn't stop moving the pieces. I couldn't. The operation was already running. But what I felt, she looked up. That was never part of the plan. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I just held both things at once. For a long time. You should have told me. Yes. Earlier. Before it. Yes. I know. Naomi. I know, Stephanie. The library settled around them. The ventilation system, the low hum of fluorescence, the distant sound of the school building existing. Stephanie drank her coffee, which had gone slightly cool. Naomi watched her. I want something from you now, Stephanie said. I know. What? The truth. Every time. Even when it's bad. Even when you've decided I can't handle it. Especially then. I'd rather have the real thing from you than find out later you were protecting me from it. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Something in her face, that surface, always so controlled, so precisely managed, moved. Not dramatically, but visibly to someone who knew where to look. Okay. They stayed. Neither of them moved to leave. Stephanie opened her workbook. Naomi pulled one from Stephanie's side of the table. They sat in the familiar quiet of 2 people who had, without making a production of it, decided to keep going. And the library held them the way it always had, low light and book smell, and the specific piece of a room that didn't ask anything from the people inside it. Seo-jun arrived at 7. He stopped in the doorway. Saw Naomi. His face went to the careful neutral. The one Stephanie could now read as fluently as any of his expressions, the one that meant his mind was moving fast behind very still eyes. He looked at Stephanie. She gave him the smallest nod. Not it's fine. Not I've handled it. Just, I know what I'm doing. Trust me. He looked at Naomi for one more second. Then he crossed the room and took his chair and opened his book, and the 3 of them sat in the library until the lights dimmed at 9. The Mafia Heir, the quiet girl, and the most dangerous person in the room. And for 2 hours, in the particular piece of books and low light, nothing was falling apart. It was, Stephanie thought, the most normal thing that had happened in months. She didn't say that, but she thought it. And she thought that normal, right now, was the most valuable thing in the room. Minsu had been pulling the thread for 3 weeks. He did it the way he did everything, methodically, without announcing what he was doing or why, fitting it into the margins of everything else his days required. He had started with the anonymous channel used to expose Chaiwon, had traced it to Naomi's network, or to the visible edge of Naomi's network, the part that was designed to be findable if you were good enough, which was itself a choice that told him something about the person who built it. You didn't leave a traceable edge by accident. You left it because you wanted someone to stop there. He didn't stop there. Below Naomi's layer, underneath the 3-country burner routing and the ghost channels and the infrastructure that had taken him the better part of 2 weeks to fully map, there was another layer. Older. More patient. Built not in response to anything that had happened at SIA, but before it, long before it, like someone had laid the foundation of a building and then waited for the right tenants to move in. The channel had been active for 18 months before Naomi arrived at Seoul International Academy. Minsu sat with this for 2 days. Checked it from different angles. Ran it through 2 separate verification processes, the kind he didn't use often because they required resources he preferred to keep unremarked. The answer was the same both times. Someone had been watching this school, specifically, the intersection of the Kong and Yu family's interests in this school, before Naomi had chosen it. Before Stephanie had arrived. Before the fellowship that brought Dr. Tiwa to Seoul had been publicly advertised. The fellowship that had been advertised 3 months after the channel went active. He did not bring this to Seo-jun immediately. He kept pulling. What he found over the next week reorganized everything. A financial connection between the fellowship program's founding grant and a holding company that didn't exist anymore. A holding company that had been dissolved 8 years ago and whose assets had been quietly redistributed into 3 separate legitimate entities. one of which had a board member whose name appeared once in the Kong family's own records from 15 years ago. A name Min-soo recognized. He sat with it for a long time. The library was closed by then. It was past midnight. He was in the car outside the Kong residence, the engine off, the city doing its quiet late-night thing around him. He looked at the name on his screen for a while. Thought about what it meant. Thought about the 11 years he'd worked for this family, and the things he knew, and the things he'd chosen not to examine too closely, because some architectures were built to hold weight, and you didn't take out a load-bearing wall without understanding what was above it. He thought about Dr. Tiwa's fellowship. The grant. The timing. He got out of the car. Went inside. He brought it to Seo-jun at midnight on a Tuesday. Seo-jun was in the study. Not working, just sitting, which he did sometimes when he had too much to think about to sleep. Min-soo set the tablet on the desk. Didn't explain. Let him read. Seo-jun read it twice. The second time slower, going back over specific sections, the way you reread something when the first pass gave you an answer you needed to verify. When he finished, he set the tablet down. Put both hands flat on the desk. Looked at the wall for a moment. How far back does it go? 15 years at minimum. Possibly longer. The earlier records are cleaner, harder to find, which means someone better was building them. Who else has seen this? No one. Seo-jun was quiet. The study was the kind of quiet that had weight. The quiet of a room where significant things had been decided over years, absorbed into the walls. The fellowship, he said. Not a question. Yes. It wasn't random. No. She was brought here specifically. Still not a question. Both of them. The fellowship was constructed to bring Dr. Tiwa to Seoul National. Stephanie's enrollment at SIA was the secondary condition. The grant that funded the fellowship program was seeded. By the holding company. Yes. Another silence. Longer. Who's at the top of it? Min-soo set a photograph on the desk. It was old. Taken maybe 15 years ago, the image quality of a different era, slightly grainy at the edges. 2 people in it. One of them Seo-jun recognized immediately, younger but unmistakable. The other he had to look at for longer. He looked at it for a long time. When he looked up, his face was doing the thing that Min-soo had seen exactly twice before in 11 years. The controlled surface with something tectonic moving underneath it. The expression of a person whose understanding of their own history has just been restructured without their permission. Don't tell Stephanie. Quiet. Certain. Not yet. Understood. I need to verify the secondary connections before. I'll keep pulling. Min-soo. Sir. How long have you known? I've been pulling the thread for 3 weeks, he said. I brought it to you as soon as I was certain. Seo-jun looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. Keep pulling. Min-soo took the tablet. Left. Stephanie's phone buzzed at 11:17 p.m. She was at her desk with her question list open. She came back to it sometimes, added to it, the way you return to a document you were still writing. The workbook was getting full. She was going to need another one. Unknown number. A message, brief and complete. The people protecting you have secrets too. Ask Seo-jun who Min-soo's loyalty actually belongs to. She read it twice. Put the phone down. Picked it up. Read it again. She thought about Min-soo. About a man who had worked for the Kong family for 11 years and who she had always read as Seo-jun's. His driver, his shadow, his most constant and reliable fixed point. The way his eyes found her first in a crowd before finding Seo-jun. She thought about her mother's fellowship. The grant. The holding company she didn't know about yet, but whose existence she had been circling without naming for weeks. Every time she came back to the question she'd underlined twice. Who arranged for us to be here? She looked at her phone. Looked at the question in her workbook. She put the phone face down on the desk. Opened her workbook to a new page. At the top, wrote a new question. Looked at it for a long time. What does Min-soo know that Seo-jun doesn't? She tapped her pen 3 times. Outside her window, Seoul glittered, enormous, patient, full of people holding things back. She had come here to disappear. She had come here for her mother's fellowship and her own safety and the specific invisibility of a new city where nobody knew her name or her history or what she'd been through to get here. Instead, she was at the center of something that had apparently been in motion before she'd arrived. Something that had, in some form she couldn't yet see the shape of, arranged for her to be exactly here. She was not running. She had never been the running kind. But she was going to need answers. She closed the workbook. Picked up her phone. Opened her messages with Seo-jun and looked at the last exchange. Something practical about the vocabulary test. 2 days ago, the easy back and forth of people who had stopped needing to explain context to each other. She started typing. Got 4 words in. Stopped. Not yet. Not tonight. She needed to know more before she asked, because asking Seo-jun directly would tell him what she knew, and right now what she knew was still too incomplete to be useful. She deleted the message. Went back to her question list. Added 3 more. By the time she stopped, the page was full, and it was past midnight, and Seoul outside her window had gone to its quietest register. That particular 2 a.m. frequency of a city that never fully slept but breathed differently after dark. She closed the workbook, put her pen down, lay in the dark and thought about Minsu's eyes in the rearview mirror, finding her first, and what that meant about who he was watching for. She didn't ask Seo-jun about Minsu. Not Monday, not Tuesday, not in the library on Wednesday when they sat across from each other for 2 hours, and the question lived in her chest the entire time, patient and insistent, like a word she kept almost saying. She had learned, from Chicago, from courtrooms, from a year of navigating a world that moved faster than it announced itself, that the most dangerous thing you could do with incomplete information was act on it before it finished assembling. Ask too early and you showed your hand. Ask wrong and you closed a door. She needed the picture clearer before she moved. So she watched instead. She had always been good at watching. Minsu on Thursday morning, holding the car door, his eyes finding her on the school steps before finding Seo-jun coming down them. A half second she might have missed 3 months ago and didn't miss now. Minsu on Friday, a phone call he took 20 meters from the car while Seo-jun was inside the school, brief, quiet, the specific posture of someone reporting rather than receiving. To whom she couldn't hear. She noted it, added it to the list. The list now ran 4 pages. Seo-jun told her about the dinner on a Friday rooftop, chips between them, the city doing its late afternoon thing below. Saturday, he said. My father wants you for dinner. Again. Different this time. No event. Just the house. She looked at him. What changed? He finished deciding. A pause. He wants to know what he's accepted. Now that he's accepted it. Okay, she said. Okay. I said okay, Seo-jun. Don't make it a thing. He looked at her. She ate a chip. He looked back at Seoul. And she caught it, just barely, just at the edge of his profile. The thing his face did when he was trying not to smile and was losing the effort slightly. Saturday came gray and cool. The kind of Seoul November day that smelled like rain that hadn't decided yet. She wore something her mother had approved with a single nod. Not the burgundy this time, something quieter, because this dinner wasn't the patron's dinner and she understood the distinction. The patron's dinner was a test. This was something else. An admission. And admissions required a different register entirely. Seo-jun came to the door himself. No Minsu, which she noted. He gave Minsu the evening, Seo-jun said, reading her expression with the fluency he'd built over months of paying attention. He does that sometimes. When he wants something to feel like what it is instead of what it looks like. What is it? Dinner. He held the door. Just dinner. The Kong residence at night was different from the Kong residence at the patron's dinner. It was inhabited. That was the word. The lamps were on in the rooms they walked past, actual books left open on actual surfaces. The particular lived-in quality of a large space that a person moved through daily rather than maintained for display. She caught a glimpse of a room with a piano and sheet music still open on the stand and filed that too. Chairman Kong was in the kitchen when they arrived. Not waiting in a formal room, or positioned for effect. In the kitchen, jacket off, doing something practical with a pot that smelled like doenjang jjigae. He looked up when they came in. You're early. You said 7, Seo-jun said. It's 6:58. He looked at Stephanie. He's always exactly on time. It used to drive his mother insane. He said it simply, not carefully, not with the guarded quality that his mother usually carried in conversations about her. Just information offered directly. She received it the same way. I'm usually 2 minutes late for everything. My mother says it's my one consistent character flaw. What does she say about your inconsistent ones? She's compiling a list. It's ongoing. He chuckled slightly and went back to the pot. Sit down. They ate at the kitchen table. Not the dining room, the kitchen, which had a round table that seated 4 and a window that looked out into a small enclosed garden, winter bare but tended. She understood this was the room he used when something was meant to feel true, rather than arranged, and she adjusted accordingly. He asked her more about her mother's work, and she told him. He asked about her childhood in Chicago. Not the trial, not the thing she'd been bracing for, just Chicago. What it was like to grow up there, what she missed about it, what she didn't. She answered honestly. He listened the way surgeons listened, like the information actually mattered. Seo-jun ate his jjigae and said almost nothing, and watched them both with the expression of a man watching 2 people he cared about navigate each other, hoping and not saying that he was hoping. At the end of the meal, Chairman Kong set his spoon down and looked at her. Your mother made a choice when she came to Seoul. She didn't have to take the fellowship. She earned it. She did. She also had 3 other options that year. 2 in the United States, 1 in London. She chose Seoul. Stephanie looked at him. You know a lot about her application process. I take an interest in the hospital's programs. Do you? The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window the garden was dark. The bare branches of something that would bloom again in April, just visible against the city-lit sky. She made a good choice, he said finally. Seoul has been good for both of you, I think. Yes, Stephanie said. It has. She held his gaze. He held hers. And in the kitchen of the Kong residence on a gray November Saturday, with his son sitting between them saying nothing and the doenjang jjigae going cold in their bowls, something passed between them. The acknowledgement that they were both people who paid attention and had been paying it, and that this fact alone put them in a specific kind of conversation that didn't require everything to be said out loud. He walked them to the door himself. Seo-jun went ahead to the car, giving them the threshold she understood deliberately. Chairman Kong shook her hand. Pleasantly, he let go of her hand. Good night, Stephanie. Good night, Chairman. She walked to the car. Got in. Seo-jun was already there. Min-soo was not, the evening off still. Seo-jun was in the driver's seat, which she had never seen before. He drove the way she would have predicted. Smooth, unhurried, completely in control without appearing to be. Seoul moved past the windows. She looked at the city. Her city now, genuinely hers. The streets with names she knew and corners she recognized, and a coffee shop on Maipodero she would never be able to look at the same way again. She thought about her mother choosing Seoul from 4 options. About a grant. About a holding company that had been dissolved 8 years ago whose fingerprints she was still tracing through 4 pages of questions she hadn't shown anyone. Seo-jun. Your father knows more about my mother's fellowship than someone who takes a general interest in hospital programs would know. The car moved. He didn't answer immediately. She waited. She was good at waiting. Yes, he said finally. How much more? Another pause. Longer. I'm working on understanding that. She turned to look at him. His profile in the city light, clean, steady, looking at the road with the specific intentionality of someone choosing to look at the road. Min-soo is pulling something. His hands on the wheel didn't move. Yes. And you haven't told me yet because it isn't finished. Yes. When it's finished. I'll tell you everything. He said it to the road. Then he looked at her, a quick, full, genuine look before his eyes went back to driving. I'll tell you everything, Kenin. I promise. She held that. Turned back to her window. Okay. She believed him. That was the thing she was still getting used to. How completely she believed him. It had arrived without her noticing and installed itself somewhere central. The way important things did, quietly and without ceremony. The light turned green. He didn't accelerate for 1 full second. Then he did. And they drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was different from all their other silences. Full rather than comfortable. Both of them holding things they weren't ready to put down yet. The city moving past and Seoul doing its late evening glitter, and the question between them sitting patient and enormous in the space neither of them had filled. He stopped outside her building. She gathered her bag. Her hand was on the door when he said, How long have you known about the file? I didn't know about the file. I knew Min-soo was pulling something. How? Because I watch. She looked at him. The same way you do. He looked back at her. In the lamplight from the street his expression was the one she still couldn't fully name. The one that had been accumulating in her category of unnamed things for months, getting fuller and more specific, and more impossible to keep calling unnamed. Kenin. Yes. After I tell you everything, he stopped. Started differently. When this is clearer. All of it. I want to, he stopped again. She waited. I want to take you somewhere that isn't a library or a rooftop or a car, he said. Just once. Somewhere normal. She looked at him for a long moment. At the boy who had sat across from her in a corner and turned pages and moved lamps and waited outside buildings and learned to pronounce a Yoruba name and said no to his father because he decided something and held the decision even when it cost him. Okay, she said. Okay. She got out of the car, walked to the building entrance, turned around. He was watching. She had known he would be. She raised her hand, gave a small wave, and went inside. He sat outside the building for 4 minutes before driving away. Min-soo came to him at midnight. Not the study this time. Seo-jun was in the kitchen, which was where he went when he had too much to think about to sit in a formal room. Min-soo set his tablet on the kitchen table. Seo-jun looked at it. The secondary connections, Min-soo said. They're verified. Seo-jun read through it. Slower this time than the first time, because the first time he'd been absorbing the structure, and this time he was absorbing the implications. The fellowship grant, and the holding company and the board member, and the name in his family's 15-year-old records. All of it connected now, fully connected, the picture complete enough to see. When he finished, he closed the tablet and put both hands flat on the table the way he did when he needed to keep himself still. She said you were in the photograph, Min-soo said. She didn't know it was a photograph. She knew there was a file. She's been watching me. Yes. Min-soo was quiet for a moment. She's going to find it herself. Whatever you don't tell her, she'll find. I know. He looked at the tablet. At his own hands on the table. I need to understand the why before I tell her the what. If I tell her what without why she'll do something with it before she has the full shape of it and it'll put her in a position before she's ready. Yes. Min-soo nodded. Picked up the tablet. Paused at the kitchen door. Seo-jun. The photograph. She should hear it from you. Not from whoever sent her that message. Seo Jun looked at him. You know about the message. I monitor unknown numbers that contact her phone. Per your instruction. You know what it said? Yes. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window the garden was dark. The same bare branches Stephanie had looked at through the same glass 3 hours ago. How much time do I have? Seo Jun said. Less than you want. More than you think. He left. Seo Jun sat in the kitchen for a long time after, the tablet gone, the room quiet, Seoul doing its past midnight thing outside. He thought about a girl at a window on the other side of the city, tapping her pen 3 times, adding lines to a list that was getting closer and closer to the answer he needed to be the one to give her. He needed to be faster. Minsu found the name on a Tuesday. The final connection, the one that closed the circle, that took a 15-year-old photograph and a dissolved holding company and a fellowship grant and made them into a single coherent thing, came through a subsidiary record in a database that technically no longer existed, recovered from an archived server that had been decommissioned in 2019. The kind of record that survived only because someone had been careless once, years ago, in a way they would never have imagined mattering. It mattered now. He sat with it for 1 hour, verified it from 3 angles, considered what he was holding and what it meant and what it would do to the people it touched when it landed. Then he called Seo Jun and said, "Tonight, come to the car." They sat in the parked car outside the Kong residence. Engine off. City quiet. Minsu handed him the tablet and Seo Jun read through the final file without speaking. It took 8 minutes. When he finished he handed it back and looked out the window and didn't say anything for a long time. "Walk me through it," he said finally. The fellowship grant originated from a holding company dissolved in 2014. The holding company was funded by 3 sources, 2 legitimate, 1 not. The third source traces to an account held jointly for 6 years by 2 people. Minsu paused. Your father, and Dr. Adedawa Kanin. The city outside was very still. They knew each other, Seo Jun said. More than that, the account was active for 6 years starting in 2004. The year Stephanie was born. The year before your mother died. What was the account for? I don't know the full purpose yet. But the fellowship, the program that brought Dr. Tiwa to Seoul, the one constructed specifically around her research, the one that had been designed before it was advertised, was funded by the residual assets of that account after the holding company dissolved. He brought her here. Yes. On purpose. For a purpose. Yes. Seo Jun was quiet, looking at the window, at the dark garden, at the bare branches of the things that would bloom again in April. He knew about Stephanie before she arrived. Almost certainly. That's why he accepted it. When I chose her. Not because I said no and held the choice. He already knew who she was. He was expecting it. Minsu said nothing. He was expecting it, Seo Jun said again. Quieter this time. The specific quiet of a person whose understanding of their own history has just been restructured. Not collapsed, not destroyed, but rebuilt at a different angle that makes everything look slightly different from the new position. He thought about his father's face at the patron's dinner. That's what makes it interesting. About the kitchen table. She made a good choice. About your mother was like that said to the window 20 years of grief in 7 words. He thought about what it meant that his father had known Dr. Tiwa, had known her well enough to share a financial account for 6 years, and had never once mentioned it. Not in 15 years. Not even when his son had sat across from him and said no and meant it. The photograph, he said. The one from the original file. Who took it? Unknown. But my father is in it. Yes. And the second person. I believe it's Dr. Tiwa. Approximately 20 years ago. A pause. Before you were born. Before Stephanie was born. They were what? Friends. I don't know yet what they were. The car held them in its specific quiet. Seo Jun put his head back against the headrest and looked at the car ceiling for a moment. Not defeated, just thinking, the way he did things, absorbing impact and coming through it still vertical. Who built the original channel? The one underneath Naomi's lair. The one that was active before any of this started. I don't know, Minsu said. Yet. But it's not my father. No. He was watched by it the same as everyone else. Whatever it is, it's older than his involvement and larger than the fellowship. So there are more layers, Seo Jun said. My father's, whatever his connection to Dr. Tiwa is, whatever he arranged. Naomi's, her operation against the use, which overlapped with everything but was its own thing. And something underneath both of them that was here first, and has been watching all of it. Yes. And we don't know who runs this layer. Not yet. Seo Jun closed his eyes for exactly 5 seconds. Then opened them. I have to tell her. Yes. Not yet. I need. Seo Jun. Minsu said it quietly. Without the sir, which meant something. The message she received. The unknown number. Whoever sent it knows about the file. Possibly knows more than we do. If she goes looking on her own with what she already has. She'll find it before I can shape the conversation. She may already be looking. He knew Minsu was right. He had known since Saturday night, since she'd said Min-soo is pulling something with the calm of someone who had worked it out through observation alone. Since she'd said I watch, the same way you do. He had known that her 4 pages of questions were leading somewhere, and that the pace of her getting there was faster than he'd calculated. Tomorrow, he said. I'll tell her tomorrow. Stephanie was at her desk at 11:40 p.m. when her phone lit up. She had been rereading her question list. Not adding, just reading, the way you reread a document when you felt the end of it approaching and wanted to understand the whole shape before you arrived. 4 pages. The fellowship and the grant and the timing and Min-soo's eyes in the rear view, and I take an interest in the hospital's programs and the things Seo-jun had said in the car. I want to understand the why before I tell you the what. He was close. She could feel it in the changed quality of his silences. She was close too. Her phone lit up. Unknown number. Different from the previous ones, new, the 3rd unknown contact in 2 months. She opened it. The people protecting you have secrets too. Ask Seo-jun who Min-soo's loyalty actually belongs to. She stared at the screen. Read it twice. Put the phone face down. Picked it back up. Read it a 3rd time. She had gotten this message before. Weeks ago. She had sat with it and decided to wait, to let the picture assemble, to not move on incomplete information. The picture had been assembling. But whoever was sending these messages didn't know she was already close, or did know and was accelerating something, pushing her to move before she was ready. Why? She put the phone down again, opened her workbook to a fresh page, and wrote 3 words at the top. Who benefits from this? She thought about it from the beginning. Not from when she arrived in Seoul, from before that. From the fellowship. From the grant. From whatever had arranged for Dr. Tiwa to choose Seoul over London and the United States and a career trajectory that had been moving in a different direction until it didn't. Who benefited from them being here? She went back through everything she knew. The Kong and Yu families. Naomi's operation. Chairman Kong and the patron's dinner, and she made a good choice. The way he'd said it, not you made a good choice coming here, but she made a good choice about Dr. Tiwa, about a decision that apparently he had specific knowledge of. She stopped writing. Read that back. She made a good choice. Her mother's fellowship. The grant. The program that had been designed before it was advertised. She'd heard that somewhere. She'd noticed it and filed it, and not come back to it until now. Designed before it was advertised. Which meant someone had known what the program would look like before it was public. Which meant someone had built it. She opened her laptop. Started at the fellowship program's public records and worked backward. She was not a hacker. She had no tools for that and no interest in acquiring them. But she was the daughter of a woman who had taught her that almost everything was publicly accessible if you knew how to look, and she knew how to look. She found the grant record at 12:47 a.m. She found the holding company at 1:15. She found the dissolution date and the asset redistribution at 1:32. She stopped when she found the subsidiary record. The one in the archived database. The one that Min-soo had found through tools she didn't have and methods she didn't use. She had found it through a footnote in a publicly available Hospital Foundation document from 2013. A funding acknowledgement, buried in an appendix, that mentioned a holding company by name in the context of a donation. She had the name now. She had the dissolution date. She could not see inside the holding company's records the way Min-soo could. But she didn't need to, because she had something Min-soo didn't have. She had her mother. She knocked on Dr. Tiwa's bedroom door at 1:45 a.m. Her mother was awake. She was always light sleeping on the nights before early surgeries, which Stephanie had known since childhood and had timed accordingly. Dr. Tiwa opened the door in her housecoat, took one look at her daughter's face, and stepped back. Come in. Stephanie sat on the edge of the bed. Showed her mother the laptop. The grant. The holding company. The dissolution date. Dr. Tiwa looked at it for a long time. And her face did something Stephanie had never seen it do. It didn't go neutral. It didn't go to the professional composure her mother deployed when information was difficult. It went somewhere else entirely. Somewhere older. Somewhere the professional composure couldn't reach, the expression of a person encountering something they had buried a long time ago and are still finding alive. Mom. Dr. Tiwa sat down on the bed beside her. Looked at the laptop screen. Looked at the holding company name. Where did you find this? A footnote in the Hospital Foundation records from 2013. Steph. Mom. Do you know this company? Dr. Tiwa looked at her daughter. At the laptop. At her daughter again. I know the person who funded it, she said. The bedroom was completely quiet. Outside the window Seoul was at its quietest. 2 a.m., barely breathing. Who? Stephanie said. Dr. Tiwa closed the laptop gently. Set it on the bed beside her. Looked at her hands for a moment. The surgeon's hands, the careful ones, the ones that had always been steadier than anything else about her. His name is Kong Jae-dae, she said. He goes by. Chairman Kong. Dr. Tiwa looked at her. Yes. The room held itself still. You knew him, Stephanie said. Before Seoul. Yes. How long? A long time. Her mother's voice was careful. Not evasive, careful, choosing each word with the precision of someone who understood that what they said next was going to restructure something. We met when I was doing research in London. 21 years ago. He was there for, she stopped. Started again. We were friends. For a long time. Then things became complicated and I came home. You were born. I didn't hear from him for years. But he kept track of you. I didn't know that. Not until, she paused. Not until the fellowship was offered, and I started looking into the funding and found. The holding company. Yes. And you took it anyway. Dr. Tiwa looked at her daughter for a long moment. At the face she had raised, the careful, watching, patient face of a girl who had learned early that paying attention was its own form of protection. I took it because I earned it. Because the research was real and the program was legitimate, and because I decided that whatever Jade's reasons were, they were his to carry and not a reason for me to give up something I'd worked 20 years for. She paused. And because you needed to leave Chicago. And this was safe. And somewhere in me I knew that he would keep us safe here. Yes. Stephanie sat with this. With the shape of what had just been handed to her. The 21 years and the London research and the fellowship grant and the thing Chairman Kong had said at the kitchen table. She made a good choice. The way he'd said it. Like he knew. Because he had known. Because he had built the conditions for the choice and then watched her mother make it and called it good. Does he know you know? Stephanie said. I expect so. And Seo Jun. Dr. Tiwa looked at her. What about Seo Jun? Does he know any of this? I don't know what Kong Jade has told his son. Stephanie thought about the car on Saturday. I want to understand the why before I tell you the what. The way his hands had not moved on the steering wheel when she'd said your father is in the file. The way he'd said I'll tell you everything, Canine. I promise. Said it to the road. Said it like it cost something to say. Said it like he was already carrying the weight of knowing and trying to figure out how to put it down in a way that didn't hurt her. He knew. He was close to knowing everything, and he was trying to get to her before the picture completed itself without him. She picked up her phone. 2:43 a.m. She opened her messages with Seo Jun. Looked at the last exchange. Practical, easy, the back and forth of two people who had stopped needing to explain context to each other. She typed, "Are you awake?" 3 dots appeared immediately. Yes. I found the holding company. A pause. Longer than his usual response time. She waited. How much do you know? Enough. My mother told me the rest. Another pause. I was going to tell you tomorrow. I know. Canine. I know, Seo Jun. She looked at her mother sitting beside her on the bed, at the laptop between them, at the city outside the window doing its deep night quiet. Can you come tomorrow? Not the library. Somewhere normal. The dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Yes. I'll come tomorrow. Bring Min-soo. A longer pause this time. Why? She looked at the question list on her desk. 4 pages. The line she'd added and underlined twice. What does Min-soo know that Seo Jun doesn't? The unknown number messages and who would benefit, and the third layer that was older than everything else and had been watching all of it from underneath. Because I have questions he needs to answer too, she typed. And I think he's been waiting for someone to ask them. She put the phone down. Looked at her mother. Dr. Tiwa looked back at her. At the face she had named with intention, with hope, with the specific belief that sweetness and wealth could coexist, and that a child could carry a name like a promise into whatever world she walked into. How are you feeling? Stephanie thought about it honestly. About everything that had assembled itself over the last 4 months. About a trail that ran 21 years deep and had her mother's name in it, and was still, underneath everything, not finished. I'm not scared, she said. Dr. Tiwa nodded. Like this was the right answer. Like she'd expected nothing else. Good, she said. Then we can handle it. At 7 a.m., Min-soo's phone rang. He was already awake. He was always already awake, a habit of years in a profession that didn't allow for being caught sleeping. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Different from the ones before. He answered it. Silence on the other end. Then a voice he had not heard in 11 years. Low, precise, with an accent that moved between 3 languages the way water moved between levels, finding the lowest point by instinct. She found the holding company, the voice said. Min-soo said nothing. It's time to bring them in. All of them. I'll need authorization from. You have it. You've had it for 11 years. You've been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment is now. The line went dead. Min-soo sat in his car outside the Kong residence and looked at the screen for a long time. At the unknown number, already gone, already untraceable, already registered in 3 countries simultaneously, and then nowhere at all. He knew that voice. He put his phone in his pocket. Got out of the car. Looked up at the building, at the lit window on the 3rd floor where Seo Jun had been awake since 2:43 a.m., when a message had come in and his lights had gone on and stayed on. He thought about 11 years. About a job that had started as one thing and become another thing, and was now, apparently, becoming its final thing. He went inside to make coffee. There was a conversation coming, and it was going to require everyone in the same room, and he had learned a long time ago that difficult conversations went better when someone had made coffee first. He put the kettle on. He thought about a photograph taken 21 years ago in London. About two people standing in it who had made decisions that had moved like dominoes through 2 decades and 2 families, and one quiet girl from Chicago who had come to Seoul to disappear, and had instead become the center of something larger than any of them had fully told her yet. He thought about the voice on the phone. He thought about the third layer, the one underneath everything, the one that had been watching from the beginning, the one that had placed Naomi and accelerated Zed, and sent the unknown messages, and waited with a patience that made Chairman Kang's patience look impulsive. He had known for 11 years who ran it. He had been waiting for 11 years for the right person to ask. The kettle boiled. He made 3 cups, one for Seo Jun, one for himself, one for the conversation that was coming, and carried them upstairs. My lovelies, Minsu. Drop everything you thought you knew about this man in the comments because Season 3 is about to rewrite everything. Who do you think is on the other end of that phone? Because the answer has been sitting in this story from the very beginning, and some of you are going to lose your minds when it lands. Subscribe right now if you haven't. The finale is coming, and you do not want to piece this together from someone else's comment section. See you in the next chapter.